Parental alienation is a term increasingly used by psychiatrists, psychologists, lawyers, judges, and various social workers to describe a child's irrational rejection of a normal range, loving parent. Although not exclusively linked to high conflict separations and divorces, specialists in family breakdown see a growing number of affected children with emotional deficits reminiscent of child soldiers. They're set against a targeted parent and demonstrate a total uncritical loyalty to their other favoured parent, who is typically content with the breakdown of all communication. This painful experience and the use of the term parental alienation is the source of great conflict in families and among professionals involved. At the heart of the matter is the extent of manipulation. My article contextualises these family-level disputes in a rather more far-reaching discussion of manipulation in moral philosophy. It is Alistair MacIntyre's argument that a central aspect of modern life is the utilitarian collapse of means and ends, which effectively turns everyone into someone else's end. As it is currently discussed, there are at least 5 thorny issues making parental alienation a controversial term. One is the use of brainwashing as a scientific term. 2, professional competence in distinguishing psychological and physical abuse. 3, long-term risks for children's mental health. 4, the fashion for labelling individuals with personality disorders, in this case manipulative parents who tend to be labelled as narcissists. And 5, perhaps most controversially of all, how to treat the pathology if indeed it is one. In this short talk, I'm going to address these issues indirectly and concentrate on why despotism and social pathologies are important concepts for a realistic understanding of dialogue. The dialogical aspects of conflict include issues of soft power, of fake consultation, of the centralisation and control of knowledge. After all, dialogue is perhaps one of the most effective means of manipulation and dishonesty in all its forms. In short, manipulation is a structural issue tied up with a warm and fuzzy word. If the word dialogue is to be used truthfully, then a critical conception of dialogue management is really crucial. This is about the control and rationing of dialogue. Parental alienation activists may be congratulated for exposing irrational and worryingly trivial childhood rejections of the most basic level of human solidarity. They've gone a long way to reveal the dynamics of manipulation by some parents. Activists have also highlighted the bizarre infantilization of justice systems which appear content to see children coached in dishonesty and which neglect a kind of white-collar crime at the family level. Nevertheless, behind these issues are the powers to regulate dialogue and manage conflict, more or less still in line with Frederick the Great's injunction to argue as much as you like about whatever you like, but obey. Designed to win inner consent, this defining statement of 18th century enlightened despotism is still unconsciously adhered to by professionals who display a loyalty to contracts not fit for purpose. In the face of complex multi-layered family disputes, court-ordered reports are compiled and ineffective reunification therapies pursued on the basis of superficial interviews with a few of the main individuals involved. Without industrial actions, professional complaints about insufficient time and resources for proper investigation tend to be heard most of all only after tragedies are brought to light and the professionals involved have to explain their errors. One of the key points of my article is that the extent of these failures is covered up by public agencies in Europe, especially in France, where the term parental alienation is banned. Private enterprise therapeutic solutions existing mainly in the United States are more transparent about failure rates, but they're extremely costly. The specifically Kantian sense of contract loyalty I consider here is articulated in Kant's 1784 essay, What is Enlightenment?, written during the transition from serfdom and slavery to the hegemony of the private contract. Obedience to contracts and the privatization of reason was to be balanced by an unrationed public discourse under a benevolent despot, and we may wonder if this 18th century idea of effective social communication has not been revived by the internet. However, what my article argues is that contract loyalty is one aspect of the structuring of parental alienation. Secondly, I've come to know about parental alienation through my partner, a French schoolteacher and divorcee who is officially reported to have been demonised by her two elder daughters, aged 11 and 13. I say a little bit about their case in my article, and I point out that these parental erasures extend to entire families and former friends. Indeed, anyone who cares about truthfulness and who might question extreme side-taking or the religious and totalitarian political traditions of denunciation, these are all people likely to be cut off by children in the care of a manipulative parent. However, my main point here is that parental alienation is experienced by many mothers, and many psychologists treating the problem are women. Yet the phenomenon was long misrepresented by men under the banner of fathers' rights. As more research was done, it became evident that parental alienation is much more evenly experienced by men and women, and while it affects all classes and ethnicities, the financial power to contest it legally is of course very uneven. Lamentably, women have also sidelined the egalitarian issues of this manipulation. The inclusion of the term parental alienation in the World Health Organization's 11th revision of the International Classification of Diseases, or ICD-11, was opposed by an international petition with 150 signatures almost exclusively from women. They opposed inclusion on the grounds of misuse by abusive fathers and by misdiagnosis by incompetent professionals. However, the problems of misuse or misdiagnosis touch virtually all the diseases listed in ICD-11, so it's not surprising that the petitioner's claim that parental alienation is junk science was rejected. However, the gendered battle over the official indexing of parental alienation in the ICD-11 suggests a reversion to a pre-feminist battle of the sexes. This is divorced from truth-seeking. Thirdly, my article refers to fogging partly as a reference to the risk of misdiagnosis in cases where a child makes serious accusations of abuse against a parent. Real abuse is, of course, an entirely rational reason for estrangement, whereas the diagnosis of parental alienation, by definition, refers to irrational, arbitrary rejections. Child psychologists recognise the latter through certain fingerprints, one of which is an exaggerated sense of entitlement not seen in the victims of physical or sexual abuse. However, trivial reasons for rejecting a parent, such as they make me eat green vegetables, have been treated in family courts as relevant justifications, and this emotional surrealism can be underpinned if complaints are mixed with more serious accusations. Ironically, it is the advocates of parental alienation as a scientifically valid pathology who argue that serious matters ought to be taken seriously and properly investigated to clear the air of the fog of false denunciations. However, this takes time for hard-pressed public services, during which the burden of guilt on the part of children manipulated into making false accusations grows and makes reconciliation all the harder. The crucial factor which aggravates parental alienation is the interference by several parties, not just a narcissistic or manipulative parent, in the normal breach and repair sequences of the relationship between a growing child and their other parent. Abnormal breaches are created and repairs are prevented through a combination of dishonest stratagems plus the ineffective or negligent management of dialogue and mediation by other parties. There's now quite a lot of anecdotal evidence from the grown-up children who've experienced this mismanagement that the negative consequences for mental health are lasting and deeply felt. It is argued that early intervention is crucial. Fourthly, the best case I could find against these analytical and first-hand accounts comes from Jean Mercer, who has a reputation as a child-centred psychologist and opponent of alternative therapies. However, Dr. Mercer and her allies contesting the scientific validity of parental alienation overlook standard psychological theory about normative breach and repair sequences. They also ignore empirical experiments on the implantation of false memories. Instead, Mercer focuses on the unscientific concept of brainwashing used by some therapists working on parental alienation. This provides Mercer with a straw figure to rather too casually knock down. The stronger aspect of Mercer's case is that she in fact admits there are manipulative parents who turn their children against the other parent. But according to Dr. Mercer, most children cannot think about thinking. Although their rejections and tactics are disturbing, they're not pathological. Children survive the experience, whereas the court-ordered psychoeducational therapies, which temporarily remove children from the influence of a manipulative parent, may be traumatic, and they're only promising rather than proven in their results. According to Dr. Mercer's arguments, parents who are concerned about their children being coached in malicious dishonesty and self-deception are likely to be flawed adults, showing an overly needy desire to reconnect with their children. To Mercer's critics, hers is a do-nothing approach, or let nature take its course. However, there is no state of nature to refer to here. Rather, if one extends Mercer's position to families of mixed origins, her argument would serve to naturalise random prejudices and self-loathing. Nevertheless, what I think Mercer's work really represents is the vertical, scholarly structuring of a social pathology. It also revives and rejuvenates Hobbesian statecraft, particularly the maxim that authority rather than truth makes the law. Mercer's role here is typical of the discursive construction of a social pathology, namely, blame the victims and disperse the population. In this respect, it's important to understand that such child-centred psychology is published in legal journals where it supplants important judicial issues about the low evidence standards in family courts, the right to a fair hearing, and the rule of law itself. Lastly, a few words on solutions. It is precisely because the discursive history of social pathologies is very problematic, tainted by genocide, that the critical recovery of the concept is actually valuable. And perhaps this is what distinguishes the work of the Frankfurt School researchers forced to flee from Nazi Germany. In this tradition of Western Marxism, the all-important question is who has the right to play doctor to the sick society? So first of all, I argue it is unrealistic to expect reconciliation without a commitment to truth. Unfortunately, too many mental health professionals have adopted a postmodern conception of truth, which is really just another subjectivity, but the one bolstered up into a pillar of the social order. Of course, an extension of this logic would be that parental alienation is a moral panic about the reordering of family life, and probably a distraction from the real issues of power in advanced capitalism. That might be part of the truth, but I have two daughters, 5 and 24, and my own experience suggests that the building blocks of egalitarian solidarity emerge in kin relationships which teach children to think about thinking from the early years. When it comes to parental alienation, the case of my 2 stepdaughters in France, who I mentioned earlier, also tells me that prevention would be much better than cure. Parental alienation is a subtle form of bullying that ought to be addressed as such by schools. However, you can't underestimate the length some manipulative parents will go to in the belief they're liberating their child's true desires or instincts, which merely happen to mirror their own. This certainly appears like narcissism, but appeal cases to the European Court of Human Rights reveal a much deeper systemic flaws that amount to the state-organised segregation of parents and children in line with misconceived parenting policies. While I support parental alienation activists who argue vertical reforms to justice systems are needed, they're not enough. There are lessons to be learned from the failures of South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, particularly in the need to resolve the sense of dialogical truth that can bury important issues. So horizontal reforms also are needed, and I highlight a unique not-for-profit court-ordered programme in the United States called Overcoming Bridges Family Camps. Unlike the usual atomised official responses, this summer camp project brings several extended families together, all experiencing the same type of alienation. If this comparative principle was a standard public early intervention, the model would help level dialogue management and prevent parental alienation being turned into a set of institutionalised and moribund ritual dialogues. However, I point out that potential horizontal approaches, where a large group essentially becomes doctor and patient to itself, cannot succeed unless there is a real interest in motivation for lies and distortions of reality. Vertical and horizontal reforms need to go hand in hand. To combat a social pathology, a social intelligence needs to emerge dialogically, and this requires the development of a more quotidian habitus, not costly summer camps that come too late for many.